There's a lot of hype around AI. Is it overhyped? Is AI overhyped?
I say yes. So,
Whoa.
I know.
Okay, hold on. Explain yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, so here's what I tell people is that might not, be the most expected response, but I think AI is a very interesting technology where we had seen it before a little bit. So we've, for example, when I started Annie and was telling my dad about it, one of his comments was like, have you not watched The Terminator? And it's like, think about this, like this technology is something that we've seen in movies for a long time now. Basically, since as long as movies have been around, there's
mostly dystopian stuff,
yeah, but that's exactly it. And so I think that it's an interesting technology where as soon as we started to see that some of this was actually realistic, we kind of jumped to a lot of those type of things. We had a little bit of that preconceived notion of what it would look like. And I think that what that's created is that, don't get me wrong, I think it's an incredible technology. I just think that there's some areas that it's really, really good and really applicable. And there's other areas where we maybe, we're not quite there yet. We're leaning into the hype of the futuristic stuff.
Give me an example of where it's been overhyped.
AI isn't just changing dentistry, it's completely redefining it. Tune into Bite-sized Podcast, the dental AI and tech podcast, and stay ahead of the curve.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Bite-sized Podcast, where we tackle dental AI and tech talk, ideas, whatnot, all the good stuff in dental AI and tech. And I've got on a good friend of mine and somebody I consider to be one of the leading minds in dentistry and AI. His name's Conner Ludlow. Say hi, Conner.
How's it going?
And to really test Conner's, see if he's worth coming on this podcast. What is that a picture of?
This is Grateful Dead.
Okay, good. Well, it says Grateful Dead on it. If you couldn't nail that, I was going to say we're done.
If it didn't say that, I don't know if I would have gotten it. I'll be honest. I feel like being in Utah and skiing. I feel like you see a lot of their stickers.
Yeah. There's a bunch of hippies out here. Wannabe hippies. Who knows?
Anyway, one of their songs, I might be in trouble.
Yeah, they have a lot of. They only had one song that went top 10 in the chart, top 100 in the charts. Everything else is like weird. You have to learn to love it, though. Anyway, all right. So let's get into this. Conner was the CTO, COO of Reach, a outsourced call center. You worked there for quite a few years.
Yeah.
Ended up parting ways with that company, and you started a new company called Annie AI. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey there from Reach and why you started this other company?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, I'm just a nerd.
You're kind of a nerd. You look like a nerd, by the way.
I know. I scroll well, especially when I went full commit to the glasses. It had to complete the look.
Yeah.
But no, after I left Reach, I actually didn't think that I would end up back in dentistry. I make a lot of jokes about it because when I was a kid, I actually was. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, but as a kid, I had just a bunch of cavities, and so it kind of left me like I didn't like going to the dentist. I had a pretty rough stretch when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of correlated with pain, and I would even get sick at the smell of the fluoride. When I walked in.
Yeah.
So, my parents will joke about it. My family will joke about it a little bit just because I didn't love dentists growing up. But after I left Reach, I was the CTO at Reach. I am a developer by trade, and I spent a couple of years just writing a lot of code. And that was right when ChatGPT had come out. And so that was a lot of buzz. I had a lot of time to play around with that code there, and got really into AI. And I actually ended up releasing a couple little products outside of dentistry, thinking that was more, I'd be going into tech. I'd be really leaning into the nerd side and the dev side and going with that. And one thing led to another. And here we are back in dental.
Back in dentistry. You know what, though? Dentistry is like such a cool industry to be in.
Yeah.
It really is. It's just, it's big, but it's small,
Yeah.
Once you get to know people and you build relationships, it's tough to leave. It's really, really tough to leave. It's just a good place.
Well, and
Dentists are good people. I love working with dentists too, so.
I was literally just about to say that same thing. Like when I was at Reach, I was COO, CTO. So I did a lot of stuff on the customer support side, but
Mm-hmm.
this role at Annie has been very different where I've been a lot, deeper in those outside facing elements of the business. Right.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way. I feel like dentists are a really fun group to work with. You're dealing in a spot where, they're practice owners, they're business owners. And so for somebody that's starting a startup, like we're actually in relatively similar shoes, trying to get something off the ground and, on the hook for the bills and the pressures and stresses there. And so I really enjoy it, the dynamic of who they are, but then also just, working in a spot where hopefully there's a pretty direct impact on their day.
All right, man, let's jump into this. There's a lot of hype around AI. Is it overhyped? Is AI overhyped?
I say yes. So,
Whoa.
I know.
Okay, hold on. Explain yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, so here's what I tell people is that might not, be the most expected response, but I think AI is a very interesting technology where we had seen it before a little bit. So we've, for example, when I started Annie and was telling my dad about it, one of his comments was like, have you not watched The Terminator? And it's like, think about it. It's like this technology is something that we've seen in movies for a long time now. Basically, since as long as movies have been around, there's
mostly dystopian stuff,
Yeah, but that's exactly it. And so I think that it's an interesting technology where as soon as we started to see that some of this was actually realistic, we kind of jumped to a lot of those type of things. We had a little bit of that preconceived notion of what it would look like. And I think that what that's created is that, don't get me wrong, I think it's an incredible technology. I just think that there's some areas that it's really, really good and really applicable. And there's other areas where we maybe, we're not quite there yet. We're leaning into the hype of the futuristic stuff.
Give me an example of where it's been overhyped, like an idea or something you've seen or read or whatever.
I think there's a lot of talk about AI as a silver bullet, which again, I think that's that futuristic concept, right? It's that AI is going to do a lot of stuff for us and it's going to completely take over and run everything day to day. I think there's a lot of situations where people have kind of jumped to that as if that's exactly where we are. And there are situations and workflows where AI can handle things end to end, but I'm not personally quite at the point where I'm saying it's a full blown silver bullet yet. Again, I'm very bullish on the technology. I'm very excited about where it's going, and there are definitely moments where at Annie we're very impressed with the tech, but I think that's usually where I kind of see it maybe going too far is when it starts to get pitched as a silver.
Yeah, and the other thing is like because it's an unknown as to what the expansiveness of how it's going to affect our culture and our businesses and just our lives. There's a ton of clickbait. Like
Yes.
Anybody out there that wants to get somebody to click, they're just going to write a headline that's like terrifying, right? And then just to get you to click on it, or they're going to make some kind of like a statement that's fairly, colorful and hopefully get a click. I mean, that's just happening, right? And that people like get sucked into it. It's unfortunately the way that news is today. A lot of clickbait.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you mentioned an article about from Anthropic. Anthropic's a large language model. They built Claude.
Mm-hmm.
What was that you mentioned?
Yeah, so Dario Amodei, their CEO, made a comment I think it was last week, that he kind of end of last week, but he made a comment of that he felt like we were 6 months away from kind of disruption of white collar jobs. And I think that sparked another one of these waves where it's really easy to create that article of like, hey, if you don't read this article, you're going to lose your job in 6 months. Like that being the translation of that comment, right? I actually think Dario is really smart. He's one of my, favorite ones to kind of listen to just in the way that he talks about the AI and the way he explains a lot of things. And I don't think that was what he was trying to say with that comment, but that's, to your point, that's how a lot of it gets translated into like social media posts and articles.
Yeah. I mean, when I go out and speak, that's one of the main concerns that people have is that, AI is going to take their jobs. I mean, there's just this, And the thing with it is there are some industries where AI will definitely take people's jobs. But in the dental industry, that's a long shot. My position on that, my claim is that it's probably AI is going to be significantly influential in how a dental practice is run. But the day of robots in the office that introduce you at the door, it seems kind of just ridiculous. If you talk about like customer service, answering phone calls, I mean, the product that you've built is an AI phone assistant, right? Well, one of the pieces of, or one of the activities that it does. Holy cow, I mean, why hire a human being who's not going to do that job very well and replace that activity with an AI agent that will be efficient, that will stay consistent, get better over time, 24/7, never wants a raise, never unhappy. I mean, that industry, the customer service industry, I think is going to be heavily impacted, but that's not dentistry. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of fear around this whole thing, like, oh, we're going to have robots as dentists, and there might be that at some point, but I just don't think it's going to be the general rule of how dentistry is done. I think the human relationship is just too powerful. You want to talk to somebody that you trust. You want to talk to a dentist that you trust. You're not going to. They might use a robot to help place an implant or something like that, but I just don't think that people should be worried in the dental industry about losing their jobs.
Yeah. No, I think that what's happened with the hype is it's changed the conversation around AI to something different. Like normally when a new technology comes out, let's use the internet or a calculator or,
electricity.
Yeah, electricity. It's like, usually it's talked about as sort of a tool. It's a new technology that we have at our fingertips to be able to do something better than we could before, right? Right. And with AI, I feel like we actually talk about AI a little bit different where, to your point, like we were just talking about it replacing and it being a silver bullet and it taking over. I wish there was just a little bit more discussion around it being a tool and being a technology. And a lot of those things, even if it's a crazy technology or, everything about this being, bigger than the internet, which, I buy into a little bit. Not a little bit. I believe in the technology, but I think that the way it happens is just like other technologies. It's a tool. We're going to learn how to use the tool. The tool is going to make us more efficient and allow us to do things that we could not do before. You look at what happened with cars, for example. Like, did cars put carriage makers out of business? Probably. But look at everything that the automobile opened up, right? Like you look at construction of roads, you look at all the electronics that now go into cars, you look at all the other motorized vehicles that are out there now that, I guess you could tie back that idea of an engine and wheels.
Right.
And I think that that's a really good example where, yes, there's disruption, but I like to always think that tech is kind of an optimistic thing where it's going to allow us to do things that we weren't able to do before. And using what you were talking about with Dennis, I think that's what a lot of this looks like, because I do think you could call it a reshuffling. I think there are jobs, like customer support. I agree. I think that AI is going to change a lot of repetitive tasks, but I think it's also going to allow people to go a lot further than they could be.
Where does somebody start? Somebody that's listening to this, they've never really had much experience with AI. Where do they begin?
So I always say ChatGPT. And for anybody that is listening to this and is like, oh, I've used ChatGPT, like hopefully I didn't just lose you there and stay with me here on this. But I like pulling up my ChatGPT from yesterday. I probably sent through 15, 16 chats yesterday to ChatGPT on my side.
Just asking questions or?
Just asking questions. I mean, going back to what I said of being more efficient, I feel like I was thinking about it. Let's use code, right? I'll go on to the nerdy side.
I love nerds.
And so writing code, right? Normally, let's go 5 years ago, I would write my code. If I ran into an issue, I would have to go to Google, or there were a couple of websites that I could go to look up, keywords or things that might be similar to the code that I was writing. Now, when I write code, if I come across something that isn't working, or if I let's say, have something really easy that I needed to code. Maybe it's a button that, it doesn't take a lot of thought. It's just, hey, I need a blue button. I can say that to AI, and AI is going to write that code. And so I'm still the one that at the end of the day, I'm checking the code. I'm making sure it's working. I'm making sure there's not bugs. I try to piece that together like Legos, but it makes me much more efficient. Or topics that I'm not trained in, like law, or things that maybe you would normally go and hire a consultant or a specialist for, law, marketing, a lot of different things there, development, web design. I can go to ChatGPT and I can actually get kind of like a high level overview of what it is that I'm looking for. And in a lot of cases, it's really all that I needed was just that high level overview. And I think a lot of people have used ChatGPT. I don't think a lot of people realize how much you can use ChatGPT, how deep you can go into it.
Give me an example. Because when people use ChatGPT, they're just playing around and they're asking it when they first, start messing around with it, they're just asking it a question and going, holy cow, it actually answered my question, right? Or they're saying, write me an email to a patient who, owes us some money, or, simple tasks, just simple copywriting tasks. What's an example of something where you take it one step further?
Yeah. So I would love to see a chart of my Google usage versus ChatGPT usage over the last year.
That would be interesting.
Yeah. I would be really interested to see, like, just naturally and subconsciously what percentage of my questions have gone to Google via chat versus ChatGPT. Because I would estimate it was a little bit of a curve where I would send some things through ChatGPT. I would still use Google. And the more and more that I used ChatGPT, the more and more I started to, let's look at a coworker relationship that you might have had in the past. The more you work with a coworker, and the more that you're in situations where you're working on problems together or seeing how that other person works, you kind of start to get each other a little bit, right? And hey, if I give them this info, or if I can give them this task, or vice versa, here's generally how this coworker works, right? As that's like very similar to, I feel like, my relationship with ChatGPT, where I started to learn what type of questions I could ask, how I could ask questions, how I could utilize it more. And to give you a specific example of one of those things, deep research in ChatGPT. Research has been out for a while now, and as soon as it came out, I started using it.
Explain deep research. I'm not sure everybody understands what you mean by that. Is it just an application inside of ChatGPT?
Yeah, so deep research is if you go into ChatGPT and you send in a chat, you'll notice down at the bottom, there's a couple of little options that you can select. So they have internet search. So that's where, ChatGPT has quickly replaced Google for me, as I'll use that internet search instead of Google's. One of those options is deep research. And what happens with deep research is, think if you had a intern and you said, hey, intern, I want you to go research keywords for my dental practice that are going to be efficient. And, my demographic is, let's say, I'm a pediatric office. So my demographic is probably anywhere from 20-year-old parents to maybe early 40-year-old parents. Like, research other industries with similar demographics and find creative marketing ideas that we could potentially do. So that might be something you would give to like an intern, right? Or, a marketing consultant. With deep research, what will happen is OpenAI and ChatGPT almost becomes that intern. So when you can type out that question, hit enter, and it will actually take a little bit of time. And what it's doing is it will just go and it will search Google. It will search Bing, I guess, technically with ChatGPT, but it'll go through.
Is that a thing still? Bing's still around?
I guess ChatGPT must be keeping them. Well, don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure they still use Bing. Yeah, but it'll go through and it'll think if you went through the top 20 hits on a bunch of different Google searches and tried to read through all of those different hits, you're probably going to come across some duplicate content. It's probably going to take a little bit of time.
Right.
Deep research is a feature of ChatGPT where it will go and do all of that for you. And it might take 5 minutes. I've had some take 15, 20 minutes of just searching through sources, but then it will come back and it will actually give you your answer with references. And that's a pretty powerful tool. Like, I use that for that one example, but we've used it for some pretty crazy stuff that normally would have been really hard for me to go and research. And then the best part about it, in my opinion, is that once it's gathered all of it, I can then just ask more questions. I can say, okay, I don't actually understand this. Can you explain this concept to me? And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Now it makes sense.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's a good example. I had another example as you were talking. I was thinking about the app, the ChatGPT app.
Yeah.
And on the ChatGPT app, I just go to the
Yeah.
voice mode,
Yeah.
right? And this is how I'm doing my research. This is how I'm not using Google. It's freaking weird that I'm not using Google. I go to the voice mode in ChatGPT and I just ask it a question and I get a response that's more direct and clear. And then you can just talk to it, which you're not typing. So there's some efficiency there in terms of like just gathering information, but you can inquire further deeper into the conversation. I talked to Chat, the app, yesterday. I can't remember what it was. I was asking it about Glen Canyon Dam, right? And I had some questions about Glen Canyon Dam because I was listening to this audiobook about Glen Canyon Dam. And then I was able to ask a question and ask a further question. And I went 10 questions deep really, really quick with very specific information and found it to be, so anyway, I use it now almost all the time.
Yeah.
So a way that a dental practice can use this, I was speaking a few months ago and something came up about hiring an interpreter to come into their practice. I can't remember if they were talking about they needed they had a large Spanish speaking population of patients, and they were talking about bringing an interpreter in, and we were talking about marketing or something like that. Anyway, it came up, okay? And they're like, we have to call our interpreter because we don't have somebody in the office that speaks Spanish, and it takes them 45 minutes to get over. I'm like, are you kidding me? Have you downloaded the app? This thing will interpret for you. Let's test it out. I'm going to test this out. You speak another language? Do you speak Spanish or anything?
I don't speak Spanish. I speak a little bit of Danish, but
all right, we're doing this, dude.
If you've got any Danish listeners, I apologize in advance.
Oh yeah, let me see if I can get my audio to work correctly here. Hold on a sec.
Sure, I'm ready whenever you are.
All right, so ChatGPT, I've got a friend here. He speaks Danish. I don't speak Danish. I speak English. I'm going to ask you a question in English. I want you to repeat my question in English, or my question that comes to you in English. I want you to repeat it in Danish so he can understand. And then he's going to respond in Danish, and I want you to translate that back into English so that I can understand. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I'm all set to help you out, so just go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, so here's my first question. Hi, Conner. Why are you bald?
Hej Conner, og hvorfor du skaldet?
Fordi jeg er gammel.
I'm old.
All right, now here's the next thing. Conner, you don't look that old, man. You got to be in your 20s.
Conner, du ser da ikke så gammel ud, mand. Du må være i 20'erne.
Jeg er fuld af gammel.
Yeah, I feel old.
All right, thanks. Bye. That's pretty cool. Anyway, super, super, super cool tools that you can use with ChatGPT. Do you have any predictions about, specifically in the dental industry, over the next year or two? Where do you think this is going? Not crazy predictions, but what are you pretty confident about in how AI is going to influence the way that a dental practice is running their operations?
Yeah. So, and this is a lot of what we focus on at Annie, right? Is again, there's a lot of talk about the silver bullet, which I guess you could say that's like this, concept of raising the ceiling. It's like some crazy, use cases and crazy futuristic things. I think where we are very bullish and where we would kind of put our money in, if there's a prediction market, is actually on raising the floor rather than raising that ceiling. And inadvertently, if you raise the floor, in theory, you should be raising the ceiling. But I think
What do you mean by raising the floor? Just
so what I mean
capabilities, efficiencies?
what I mean by raising the floor is it's making your staff and your team and you more effective. So let's just use repetitive tasks as an example. Anything that is a repetitive, mundane, repeatable task, I think is a very prime target for AI. And some will, get automated sooner than others. But the reason why I like to target those type of things and why that's a lot of what we look at with Annie is a lot of the times the human that is doing that is not really, it's not like they're having to think super hard about it. They're going through the motions because somebody has to do it. And I think that is really where we'll start to see a lot of this start to take effect is actually in those areas. And what will happen is because it's repetitive, because it's mundane, and it's not necessarily the hardest thing in the world, it's going to start getting automated and people will be like, oh yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense and it works and it's awesome. And that's going to, I made that comment about like getting to know a coworker and your comfortability there. You talked about chatting with ChatGPT on the voice side. I think that's another great example how everybody thinks about talking or using, typing and sending in a message. But then the more you use it, you're like, oh, I could talk to it. I could throw it on in the car. And now you're using ChatGPT in a much different way and you start to get that comfortability. And what happens is now you're going 10 questions deep on all these different things and you're, stuck in traffic. And so you're actually getting work done by doing research and talking with ChatGPT while you're in the car. And like you think about how you as just a worker have now become more efficient. I think we're going to see that exact same thing in dentistry as we start to see some of these low-hanging fruit, automations and items start to get automated with AI. And as people start to become more familiar, then what's going to happen is we're going to be more open. We're going to start seeing more of that ramp up of some of the maybe more silver bullet-y things or those futuristic things. But I think it starts, just like a lot of things, it starts with the small things.
Yeah. All right. That's good. One last thing I want to talk about before we close up is the idea, or not the idea, but well, I guess it's an idea. The idea of generating or creating large language models that are more finite in their activity or that are more linear and not as expansive in their intent. Google came out with an LLM called MedPlan, which is a large language model like ChatGPT, but specifically for the medical industry. Why would they do that? What's the point of that? And then where is this thing going with like building lots of LLMs? Because many people may not know there's hundreds of LLMs already, and they all have different functions, right? Or they all specialize in something. So can you tell me a little bit about why Google would launch MedPlan? Is it MedPlan? I think it's MedPlan.
Yeah, I think it's called MedPlan. So have you ever heard about Dennis Rodman and his rebound training?
No.
Total tangential question. So Dennis Rodman used to sit underneath the rim or right next to the rim, and he would look at the hoop, and then he would have somebody behind him that would be the one shooting the ball. And his training regimen was that he would not look at the person shooting the ball. He would look at the hoop, look at the rim. And what would happen is that he would see so many shots, and where the ball would hit on the rim would determine where it was going to bounce. So if it landed on the top, he knew that it was going to bounce up a little bit before coming down. If it was lower on the rim, he knew it might shoot down or left or right or off the board, whatever it would have been. And I think that's very similar for those that don't fully understand what an LLM is. It's trained on data. And most LLMs that we talk a lot about, like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, those LLMs are all going to be trained on a very broad data set. It's YouTube videos, books, articles on
everything.
Yeah. So that Dennis Rodman story that I just told, you could go to ChatGPT and it's going to be able to tell you information about that. But the reason why that Dennis Rodman story came to mind was that's sort of what's happening here with like these LLMs getting trained, right? And for Dennis Rodman, he did that specifically for rebounds. It wasn't for shooting. It wasn't for stealing or, psychology. It was just rebounds. And that's what's happening with some of these LLMs, or when you hear about a medical specific LLM, or, going back to the nerd stuff, like LLMs that are better at coding, it's because they've seen more of that data and they've been trained on more of that data. And what happens is, just like humans, where we have specialties, you can create these LLMs that have a little bit more of a bias or specialty around certain things.
So there's MedPlan. Is there any others that are medical specific that you know of?
Yeah, there's a few. I think MedPlan is a good one to take a look at, just because I'm very bullish on Google and their AI strategy right now. So, big company, a lot of data and a lot of resources when it comes to training. So, but I think that, going back to my ChatGPT comments, a lot of why I start there is not just to say like ChatGPT is the ends all, the last thing you need to use. It's more so that's a great spot to get familiar, and not just get familiar in the sense of send through a few chats, but start to learn how these models operate and how to ask it questions. Asking an LLM questions is sort of like an art. And then once you start getting comfortable with that, there's, MedPlan, there's Perplexity is another one that I feel like I use a lot. There's Gemini. And then you can start to expand and use these different specialized models to either help you build workflows or to help you go beyond just that ChatGPT interface. But I think that it's, just like a lot of things, it's kind of a progression that you have to get used to.
Awesome. I love it. So I'm going to put in the show notes links to your website, how to reach you. Is it okay if I put your email in there?
Yeah, go for it.
I'll drop in there some resources on how to prompt. So if you're interested in using ChatGPT and start to mess around with it, I'll give some prompting instructions in there, some blog articles that are helpful. And I really appreciate it, man. Good luck with Annie. And I appreciate you coming on. I'll probably have you back, talk about more geeky stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could talk your ear off. We could go into this for days and get into the intricacies, but I think a lot of people, like, last thing I'll say is just, we hear about it so much right now that I think there's that feeling of I'm behind or I'm missing out, or,
it's super early. We're so early. We're so early. Yeah.
And that's why I bring
you on. Early.
Hopefully for people listening to this, they're like, oh, I've used ChatGPT a ton. I've used Perplexity. I've used AI to help me build workflows. But on the off chance that there's also people that are still kind of wondering, hey, I keep hearing about it, and what do I do? I think that that's a, very applicable starting spot and something that you can use just to start getting your feet wet. So there's still a lot of time, and I think we're just scratching the surface on everything here.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Byte Size Podcast. Tune in to stay up to date with everything dental AI and tech